Welcome to our session, Decolonised, our Patriotic Curriculum. Let me get straight into it, introduce our four speakers. On my left, extreme left, we have Ben Habib. Ben is many things to many people, but he wears the hat here of a senior figure of Reform UK. And they were very interesting for me in their manifesto that did a lot to say about patriotic curriculum. Ben, you're very, very welcome, mate. Indeed. And on my right, we've got Andre Ediagbonya. Have I said that right, Andre? Did you say no? Go, say it out loud. Go on.
Ediagbonya-Davies.
And massive apologies, mate. Andre's recently graduated from Cambridge University in history and has spoken in a number of related topics around decolonizing of the curriculum. And full disclosure, he's an ex-student of mine. And yes, I should know his surname by now. I taught him and he had me as a teacher in London Academy of Excellence in Tottenham a few years ago. And on my left, we've got contributing editor of the Daily Telegraph, Chakrvarty. And I'm delighted you're here, Dia. And without going into a big long story with your wee health scars and all, and you still managed to make it after your wee travail. So thank you very, very much. And then we've got over on my right, we've got Louise Burton. Louise, like myself, is a member of the Academy of Ideas Education Forum and just been a history teacher for about 20 years. And myself, I'm Kevin Rooney. I've been a teacher of history for many years. I teach politics. I teach mostly now philosophy, religion and ethics in a North London school. Let me tell you really quickly why this debate's happening. I proposed this to the Battle of Ideas Committee about 5 months ago. And at that same time, the election was coming up. And I looked at Reform UK's manifesto, and what they said about the patriotic curriculum just got me thinking. I thought that's going to be a good debate. So let's do that. Hence, we got the decolonised curriculum bit of the debate. We got the patriotic bit of the debate. And then we've got to ask ourselves, are we having a conversation about politics? Are we having a conversation about schools? The truth of the matter is it's all of them jumbled up and we've got to try to work it all out. So that's where we're going. And without further ado, each of our speakers will speak for 5 minutes. And then bang, I might ask him a wee question or two. Okay, Ben, are you ready?
I'm ready. Can I just say thank you very much for inviting me to speak, Kevin? I'm flattered to be here, and I'm flattered that so many people would wish to hear. You're probably not here for me. You're probably here for the other speakers. But thank you very much indeed for giving up your afternoon to this little talk. I mean, it's self-evident, isn't it, that we have a great country and a great history? Surely that is self-evident. You don't need to pick up a history book to know that, because the fact that we're all in this room able to debate subjects as sensitive as Islam all the way through to this lesser sensitive subject, in my view, because there is only one clear answer to this debate, that we can all express ourselves, at least for the moment. So far, so good. We still have free speech in this country. And we have this ability to speak freely, to hold different views, and practice what we believe in, largely because of the fantastic history we've had. We've had champions of freedom. We stand on the shoulders of giants. And I'm sick to death of the misrepresentation of British history. And it's come together, as Kevin was indicating, it's not in isolation that our history is being trashed. It is being trashed in association with a whole load of other things that are being trashed in this country at the moment. Our identity as a nation is itself being targeted. I'm a Brexiteer. I therefore believe in the constitutional, democratic unit that is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Such a unit can't exist if you hold those who came before you in contempt and in shame. Such a unit can't go forward proudly and prosperously if those who inhabit the islands don't believe in the islands. And I see the attack on our history and our language as a mechanism, frankly, to destroy the United Kingdom. The notion that the Church of England can put aside £1 billion for reparations for apparent atrocities committed by this country a couple of 100 years ago is just utterly balmy to me. First of all, even if you were to grant that atrocities had been committed, all those against whom those atrocities had been committed are dead. All those who committed the atrocities are dead. The reparations is merely a manifestation of this attack to which I refer on the country. And the Archbishop Welby should hold his head in shame as the head of the Church of England, giving into a narrative that undermines the existence of England, because that's precisely what that reparations debate is all about. It's about the destruction of the nation state of the United Kingdom and an attack, in his case, on England. And we see this not just in our history, but we see it also in our language. Oxfam, which is a late imperial production, a charity, produced a 92-page document. I don't know if any of you have seen it. Hands up if you've seen it. On decolonizing the English language. Words like mother and father are apparently not acceptable because they come from our colonial imperial past. Words like headquarters are not acceptable. This is an extreme form of ideology being perpetrated by people in this country. And why are we doing it? It is because we stand on the shoulders of giants, because we have this phenomenally tolerant, welcoming, free attitude to life, that we're prepared to put up with this nonsense. We've had, and I'm just going to talk about immigration for a second, we've had more people come to this country in the last 25 years than in all of history before that. And because of the tolerant, welcoming nation that we are, we have devised regulatory and legal frameworks to make these people feel comfortable. And the principal regulatory framework to which I'm referring, though there's lots of different aspects of it, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Through DEI, which is in my view, the promotion, this is how I define it, the promotion and celebration of ethnic, religious minorities, sexual preferences, transgender ideology, and all that goes with all of that. It's the promotion and celebration of those different aspects to the detriment, if necessary, of the majority of the people in this country. It is liberalism gone mad. It's the liberals telling us that we must champion and celebrate minorities, and to hell with democracy, to hell with the interests of the majority. It is reverse racism. And the attack on the United Kingdom comes from this reverse racism, because they want to tell you that your forefathers were all slave traders. They want to tell you that you should hang your head in shame. Because if you hang your head in shame and you accept the argument that all your forefathers were slave traders and contributed absolutely nothing of any value to the globe, that is the end of the United Kingdom. And ladies and gentlemen, that is what their aim is. So we must stand against firmly this attack on our country and the decolonization of our history and our language. Thank you very much.
Perfect timing, Ben. Andre.
If the riots this summer demonstrated one thing, it's that we as a nation are at a crossroads. Grown adults pillage high street shops while their 12-year-old children set alight hotels filled with asylum seekers, all in the name of a warped version of patriotism. Now, of course, this select minority does not represent the majority of Britons across the country in terms of how patriotic, nationalistic ideations are manifested. Yet from my point of view, this summer was only the precipice of a larger iceberg of discontent towards a movement away from an isolationist, NIMBYist version of Britain that some prefer, reinforced and endorsed by the canon within our curriculum at large. Therefore, I believe the British curriculum is in urgent need of decolonization. And it's my belief that decolonization does not equate to a treacherous dissuasion from the concept of patriotism. If anything, a decolonized curriculum is essential for presenting a more accurate, inclusive, and balanced view of history, one that equips students with the critical thinking skills necessary to understand and engage with the complexities of the modern world. A curriculum which equips future generations with a vernacular and holistic viewpoints which will enable them to choose patriotism for themselves as opposed to having it enforced upon them. As a second-generation immigrant with Nigerian heritage, born in Britain, schooled in Britain, and now paying British taxes, I've grown to recognize the importance of acknowledging the full breadth of one's history. My identity is shaped by both histories and cultures. Whether I like it or not, I am a product of an imperial project. And it's this duality which gives me a perspective on our curriculum rooted in self-critical vigilance, a recognition that understanding Britain's past requires looking at it from multiple angles and also looking beyond the colonial structures designed by the West. At its core, decolonizing the curriculum is about challenging the dominance of Eurocentric and, in some specific cases, English perspectives in education, and making space for marginalized and otherwise hidden voices and histories. It's about rethinking whose knowledge is considered valuable, whose stories are told, and how we understand the world. Only then do we as a society stand a chance of breaking free from a spell of willful amnesia, as Sankaran Krishna would name it. Some see the patriotic curriculum as a tool, especially as a response to the rise of identity politics and various forms of extremism. However, the core issue lies in the fact that the country itself is divided on what patriotism, yet alone Britishness, means. The remnants of debates around the B word, Brexit, immigration and multiculturalism have left the nation fragmented. With such deep social divides, enforcing a singular idea of patriotism in school risks becoming more about social engineering than education itself. This approach could undermine the very principles of education by imposing a narrow and potentially exclusionary vision of British identity onto the next generation. One of the main critiques against the decolonization movement is that students of colour shouldn't see themselves represented to engage meaningfully with ideas, concepts, and facts. You may be surprised by the fact that I do agree with this. The power of education should lie in its ability to transcend self and instead facilitate self-development. Therefore, why not also emphasize the need for white English or white British students, particularly in predominantly white areas such as Carlisle, where 95.1% of the population identifies as white, to experiences and histories beyond their own, especially because we now live in a world where students can turn on their phones during break times and be exposed to ideas, concepts, and facts from those beyond Europe, but will not necessarily have the verbiage or context to effectively engage with them. Representation is not a one-way street, especially in our globalized world, and we must acknowledge the reality of our interconnectedness. The isolationism that some opponents advocate is detrimental to the education of future generations. When I, as a Black Nigerian man, discuss learning about diverse histories, I'm not solely referring to just Black or Nigerian perspectives. For instance, my former politics teacher was from the north of Ireland, yet I felt we weren't exposed to sufficient texts that reflected the Irish viewpoint on colonialism and its impacts. There may be a fear that such exposure could foster radical views against England or Britain, but it's crucial that students encounter a range of perspectives. If we shy away from presenting students with differing views due to a concern about fostering anti-British sentiment, we as a society must come together and critically examine where that fear originates from. Understanding the roots of this sentiment can then reveal why engaging with Britain's complex histories from various perspectives is vital. Importantly, this isn't about indoctrination or guilt-tripping white students into feeling ashamed of their country. It's about teaching them how to critically evaluate the world that they now live in. A well-rounded education should foster empathy and understanding, preparing students to engage meaningfully with issues of race, identity, and inequality. And to dismiss these concepts as tool of divisions which do not belong in the prism of the school is to not only ignore the educational, but also the systemic negligence which led to instances such as the Windrush scandal to happen only a mere 6 years ago. While some fear that these discussions may become overly simplistic or dogmatic, excluding them from the curriculum would be a disservice to students. And I'll finish my speech by saying this: there is no war or attack on the past, but there sure is a critical need to reevaluate the way that we teach it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Great, we got the makings of a good debate coming up, and we're only halfway. Dia, you're very welcome. On you go.
Thank you so much for having me here, Kevin. This is my first Battle of Ideas event, and it looks amazing. Thank you all for coming here. I was a little surprised, if I'm honest, to be asked to speak at this debate, because this is not really my area of policy expertise. I'm not an educator, and my older child has only just started school, primary school, so I haven't had much of a direct experience with the school curriculum either. So perhaps what I can share with you is my thoughts as the mother of young children and one who wants to raise her sons with a sense of belonging. But if a foreign-born mother, like me, wishes to bring her children up with a sense of pride in being British, In my experience, she would be labelled and either an extreme right-winger or a simpering bootlicker. I've had the honour of being labelled as both. As a first-generation immigrant, it seems very strange to me that we don't raise our children to love their country. In many, if not most parts of the world, this is not just a US phenomenon, I promise you, including my own country of origin. Love for one's country is something people take for granted. It's one's country is almost like an extension of one's family. Does that mean that you like or love everything about it? No. But you feel an affinity towards it, a love towards it, a sort of responsibility towards it. I have rarely met a group of Bangladeshis, which is where I'm from, or Indians who don't complain bitterly about so many aspects of their country whenever they get together. But when they sing their national anthems, they normally have a tear in their eye. And without that love, I feel we risk raising generations of young people who are rootless, who don't feel a love or a responsibility towards their country or their fellow citizens, nor do they respect their cultural inheritance, which they have a duty to protect for future generations as its custodians. Now, it seems to me that having identified patriotism as a potential vehicle for fascism, we heard a little bit about it from Andre, the great and the good of the country have ensured that all traces of one's pride in one's homeland have been programmed out of our youth. Instead, our children are taught to be embarrassed of their history and to abandon their culture. Now, when Rishi Sunak announced his ill-fated national service back in May, I don't know how many of you remember, which would include the option for 18-year-olds to enroll in military training schemes, I was genuinely concerned. Well, I thought, how could it be a good idea to train young people in the art of defense without teaching them what is and isn't worth defending? It still amazes me that when asked to choose between Davos, if I'm correct, pronouncing it correctly, learning English was hard enough. Anyway, Davos and Westminster, Sir Keir Starmer boldly chose Davos and declared that Westminster is just a tribal shouting place, and then went on to become the Prime Minister within just a few months. Now, that really should have been the greatest honour of his life. I don't know how this happens in the UK. I can't think of any other country that this might happen in. I think we're beginning to find out that when pride in one's country or roots is systematically removed from generations of young people, that void is inevitably filled with ideologies that shout the loudest. That could be extreme environmentalism, that could be Islamism, or it could be sectarianism along ethnic lines, all of which we've seen in the past few months or years. In order to save our youth from the perils of patriotism, I feel we've given up on the one identity that really should unite all Brits, whatever their race or religion. Sharing a country is quite literally the one thing that we all have in common, that connects the fate of my son to that of Kevin's, or Ben's, or Louise's, or Andre's, if he goes on to have any. I imagine he's a bit young, but I don't mean that in a patronising way. I mean that in a very Bengali, motherly way. But take that away, and we are left with our Bangladeshi, white, black, Nigerian, Hindu, Muslim, Christian identities constantly competing against each other. And I find it really moving that Judith Kerr, the celebrated children's writer whose family fled Nazi Germany to set up home in the UK in the 1930s, wrote, "I couldn't wait after the war to become British and belong here." Less than 100 years later, it genuinely feels to me that an immigrant would not be allowed, let alone encouraged, to express that same emotion, nor would be a child born to her or any other parent in this country. That, I think, is a tragedy. Thank you.
And now we go on to a teacher, last but not least, Louise.
As a history teacher, I feel there's quite a big pressure on me now to represent the teaching community. I know there's quite a few teachers in the audience, so you'll help me out. So I'm just going to read some of the things that I currently teach, which I'm quite proud to teach and which I've worked very hard to learn and understand about. I'm still reading books on these issues, and there's been a bit of a debate in our school about what to include on the curriculum, which has involved leaving things out as well. But one thing that I would like to, that I think has been very good about the 2015 curriculum reforms is that teachers have been given some degree of autonomy in terms of making decisions about what to teach. and it has provoked debate amongst teachers, but there is still room for knowledge and evidence-based curriculum. If anybody was in the discussion at lunchtime about the Scottish curriculum reforms, trigger warning, it could be on its way here. So here we go. Alfred the Great, Athelstan, 1066, Magna Carta, Henry III, Wars of the Roses, Reformation, the Civil War, Bill of Rights, the Elizabethan era, Shakespeare and the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, the Enlightenment and the Scientific Revolution, the 1832 Reform Act, the British Empire, the 1918 Representation of the People Act, World War I, World War II, decolonisation. And I mean decolonisation as in the dismantling of the British Empire. So all those things I currently teach, and I think they all have a value as knowledge that I think British children need to know and understand growing up in Britain. Okay, Britain is not just anywhere. It has its own institutions and it has its traditions, and I think that by teaching this type of history, we give children an understanding of the environment in which they're growing up, the buildings that surround them, and the traditions and so on that take place in this country. Okay, so that's just maybe a bit controversial, I don't know. Going back to decolonisation and where that discussion is at the moment, I think Kevin's question was, do we need a decolonised or a patriotic curriculum? And I would say we've already got a decolonised curriculum. I think that battle has kind of been lost already. So I think it's now embedded in schools. And I've got two main objections to it. Number one, it selects knowledge in order to do... the way that it selects knowledge is no different, in my mind, to indoctrination or propaganda. There's currently a new textbook on the market called Black British History, which I assume some schools are going to start to use in their teaching. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but I've got an idea what's in it. The Edexcel exam board have, in recent years, brought in a new GCSE history, which is on migration to Britain. But one whole unit is on Notting Hill from 1948 to 1970. Interestingly enough, I read the kind of core content. It talks about Oswald Mosley in the 1950s, who I think lost 2 elections and then kind of faded into obscurity. It ends in 1970, so 2 of the race relations acts that were passed in the 1970s are not mentioned. And I don't think it even mentions the 1965 one, which is before the end of the syllabus date, but it's just not in the core curriculum or in the prescribed curriculum. So that's my first objection. The second is I think it essentializes knowledge. So it's motivated by ideas such as inclusivity, relevance, but I think it presupposes that, again, maybe a controversial thing to say, that only black poetry, for example, will speak to black students if you're teaching English literature. So taking certain things out, certain written works out and replacing them because they were written by an African poet or a black American writer, for example. What happens in my subject, in history, is that the curriculum, I feel, is becoming more and more broadened to include as many voices as possible, marginalized voices, for example. And I think in a lot of senses, it's just bad history. So here's another example. Did you know Henry VIII had a trumpeter who was black? Did we all know that? His name was John Blanc. He's depicted on the Westminster Tournament Roll of 1511. It's an interesting historical detail, but so I know in some schools they can spend a whole lesson on this. It was produced to celebrate the birth of Henry's son Edward. But why do we feel the need to use that? And I think it comes from what's her name, Kaufman's book called The Black Tudors.
Yep.
Okay, so I think that it's not strong disciplinary knowledge. It is tokenism. And I think I'm surprised that more students are not patronised by some of the stuff that's being taught to them in schools. If you've read Frank Furedi's book, War on the Past, he talks about we're kind of rearranging our past. We're reinforcing current preoccupations with identity and race and difference. History's been a subject, I mean, what to put in the curriculum has been a subject of debate since I started teaching in the 1980s. I'd like to say teachers should decide what's on the curriculum, but I'm not sure teachers are exempt from some of these, some of these prejudices at the moment. And so I think we could have a debate about that and discuss that a bit more. Who decides what's on the curriculum? Is it parents? Is it students? Is it teachers? Or is it the government? How much time have I got? 1 minute. Okay. I was going to talk briefly about patriotism. So I think Andre might have suggested that by decolonising the curriculum, this in and of itself could be a patriotic act. In other words, that's more representative of Britain today than maybe teaching, I don't know, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles or something like that. So I think, do I agree with this or not? I don't think patriotism can be taught. I think it's just as open to indoctrination. What I do think is that if we teach, in my subject, history, a chronological account of the history of British society and its institutions, it could serve to give all children an understanding of the world they inhabit, which is Britain, and maybe also to value it and to see how they are linked to other people living with them. That's it.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
Thank you.